The NFL draft is fast approaching. Free agency, for the most part, is in the books, at least as it relates to some of these top guys. So we thought we'd get you guys an updated top 30, top 36-ish wide receiver dynasty rankings. Of course, all of our rankings are available on Flock Fantasy, but we're going to go through and kind of talk about these guys relative to what we'd pay for them in a trade, the tiers, the tier breaks, who has a case to be higher, who has a case to be lower. Going to be a lot of fun debate in this one. So without further ado, Danny, shall we get into the elite tier, the top tier wide receivers in Dynasty?
Yeah, and these guys have proven before multiple seasons of high-end wide receiver one status. All these guys respectively, I believe, have had a top 2 season in terms of PPR points per game in the career. Specifically, I mean, CeeDee Lamb, obviously in 2023, nearly 24 PPR points per game. Everybody knows what Ja'Marr Chase did this past year. And for the most part, people kind of consider Justin Jefferson as the number 1 overall wide receiver in the league. And he's always in that wide receiver 2 to 4 range for the most part. So these guys, locks. They're going to go in the middle of the first round of your startups. And quite frankly, for me personally, once the top 3 quarterbacks are off the board, I'm perfectly comfortable taking one in my startup at like the 105, 106 area.
Yeah, there's a little bit of difference as far as like how we view these guys. For example, you have Lamb, I believe, at 2 behind Ja'Marr Chase, or do you have him at 1? Okay, so I have Lamb at 3 or 4, actually, because I have Neighbors into this tier, which to me, it's more of just like a team construction. I like to stay flexible early in my drafts. I think because Neighbors is only 21 years old, he allows you to get that great elite production that you're searching for and also build out a full status rebuild if you want to. But for the most part, it's not really a huge difference. Jefferson has proven that he's pretty much quarterback proof, even if JJ McCarthy starts this year, or God forbid Aaron Rodgers starts this year for the Vikings, he'll be fine. Chase obviously locked in now, tethered to Joe Burrow for the next 4 years. CeeDee Lamb locked in, tethered to Dak Prescott for the next foreseeable future as well. So not much debate on these guys. Everyone knows they're elite. As far as what we would pay for them in a startup, like you just said, you would take them right after those top 3 quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. For me, I would still take Burrow and Hurts over them, but they would be probably some of the next names off of the board. And 3+ first rounders basically is the going rate for these guys. If you have the 101 in your drafts, you don't need a running back, or you don't want to take Ashton Genty or whatever, feel free to send out some offers for some of these players if you're in a competitive window. Moving into the next tier, which definitely requires a little bit more debate. As I kind of just mentioned, I do actually have Neighbors into that top tier, given the age, given the prospect profile. He's the number 2 prospect in the prospect model. He came out and commanded basically like a 35% target share with Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, and a bunch of scrubs at quarterback. For me, I just look at what he did as a rookie relative to Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison, Loud McConkey, some of the guys that were highly touted prospects, had great rookie seasons. I think Neighbors did more with less. I think if you had Neighbors in Brian Thomas's exact situation, he would have outproduced what Brian Thomas did. I think if you had Neighbors in Marvin Harrison's exact situation, he would have outproduced surely what Marvin Harrison did, and so on and so forth. It's more of a pro Neighbors take than anything. I know you're going to battle back on some of these things, saying that maybe Thomas's rookie season was more impressive. He shouldn't be anywhere near CeeDee Lamb. Whatever your debates are going to be, I'm that high on Neighbors. That's my take on it.
I get it. I love Neighbors. He's my 5. I think he's obviously fantastic. I just think, he insert him in Brian Thomas Jr. situation, he's automatically going to be better. That is very much like not proven at all. Brian Thomas Jr. had nearly 90 receptions, nearly 1,300 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns, and he only played 28% of his snaps in the slot. Now you bring Liam Cohn, completely reshaping that receiving core after him. Now you're potentially getting a full healthy Trevor Lawrence for the majority of the season. And on top of that, I mean, this is a guy that we were citing as being a raw rookie wide receiver that came in and nearly put up 90 for 1,310 as a rookie. Like, we're literally looking at rookie Nico Collins with even more athletic upside.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I have him at 5. Like, especially when you factor in post-startup, who are the hardest receivers to trade for. I think, because given your team situation, maybe you're like, I maybe prefer the production that St. Brown's going to give me, or maybe you prefer the proven element of the fact that he's done it for multiple years, and same goes for Collins and stuff like that. But brass tacks, what these guys cost in a trade, Neighbors and Thomas are almost like probably
easily
a mini tier ahead of the rest of these guys, because they're very, very challenging to acquire, because they're going to be first round redraft picks at 21 and a half, 22 years old, which means you have a 7-year laneway of these dudes being multi-year wide receiver 1 finishers.
Yeah, and I will say one thing too. Obviously, again, I think Malik Neighbors very well could even be wide receiver 1 after this upcoming year. Like, I'm not saying that's out of the range of possibility. I just don't understand specifically on the Chase Jefferson versus Lamb portion how he ends up at 3 and not at 1 there, considering Lamb actually has the best season of both or all 3 of them, Chase, Jefferson, and himself. Like, I don't
Yeah, I
understand
think you
why
can
there's a
make the
disconnect
argument
there.
that he should at least be 2 behind Chase, because part of it is like Chase is my 1 because he has Burrow. Jefferson has a quarterback question mark. CeeDee Lamb has Dak Prescott. We
3
don't really
more
have any
years.
worries about his quarterback. So you could argue that there's maybe a little bit of incongruency with how I'm ranking
Yeah.
Neighbors relative to the rest of those
That's
wide
my
receivers.
problem with it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I
Yeah.
mean, I did have him at wide receiver 2 at one point behind
Yeah.
Chase only. So for
Get it
me,
up
it's
there.
just exactly. It's about what I would pay for these guys in a trade,
Yeah.
where I would select them in a startup. So with Neighbors and Thomas, it's value accumulation meets young elite upside. Like, these guys are virtually
Yeah.
untouchable when you think about what it takes to trade for them, what it takes to trade them away. St. Brown, Nakua, and Collins all kind of have differing levels of appeal, because Nakua is younger, like Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. He'll probably get a mega extension over the next calendar year, 2 years, whatever. Whereas St. Brown already on a big contract, Nico Collins already on a big contract. Those guys are a little bit older than Puka Nacua, so they're more so, in my estimation, at least if you take them in a startup, second round or whatever, you're probably more leaning towards the competitive side of building out your team, even though they're young enough that you could, hypothetically retool for a year, rebuild for a year, and still be fine with them. They do kind of almost pigeonhole you a little bit more so into competing, which is why Puka Nacua is actually ranked ahead of these guys for me, and maybe he
Number
is
6
for
for me.
you as well. So maybe I should actually just rearrange him over St. Brown right now. In this,
Correct.
one thing about Nacua that I've had a hard time getting over, and this is actually, it seems like your qualm with St. Brown as well, so it's funny that we're having this conversation, is do I rank Puka Nacua as one of the best 5 to 8 receivers in the league? Probably not, but he's in the perfect situation for his skill set, which is basically your argument about St. Brown, only Nacua is younger. So I've capitulated as such, saying that Nacua, he's basically just St. Brown, only 22, 23 years old.
Yeah, and more constant with the coaching now, in my opinion, because obviously with Ben Johnson leaving, that would be the difference for me between a Nico and an Amon St. Brown personally, because with Nico Collins, I'm kind of betting on the offense getting better with the offensive coordinator change versus with the Lions. Again, I'm not saying that Morton is all of a sudden going to be leading them to the 20th ranked offense in the league. That's not what I'm saying. Again, that's technically speaking his 1 year of sample size as an offense coordinator in the NFL. They had the 23rd ranked offense, but I don't think any of that matters considering the players in Detroit and the system that they've already kind of been running. So what I'm basically trying to point is, even if they're not the 23rd ranked offense in the league, I also do find it hard pressed to believe that they'll reach the 33, 34 points per game they were at with Ben Johnson. And maybe we do see some type of regression to the 27 to 29 range, which is still, like, again, a functional top 5 level offense, but maybe not the 33, 34 you're getting from Ben Johnson, considering he's probably at this point the best play caller on earth.
Yeah, like, you could make the argument, you could sell me on the fact that St. Brown's best years of his career maybe already happened, given that Ben Johnson was such a fixture in that offense. Again, we're not going to, rag on St. Brown too much. He's obviously still a very talented
He'd be
player.
my
He's
8th,
only
though.
25 years old. He's only a year and a half older than Puka Nacua. It's not like he's significantly older than Nacua, and Collins just turned 26. Or will turn 26 actually tomorrow. So he's still a very young player. You're getting guys that are in their prime, guys that are going to be top 15 level redraft picks, set you up when you take these guys in a startup, or if you trade for these guys, that they're going to be your wide receiver 1 for the foreseeable future. And you're going to be a hyper competitive team if they're not your wide receiver 1. They're your wide receiver 2 or your wide receiver 3.
Yeah, if you somehow have them as your wide receiver 2, 3, and let's just say you're in a startup and the board falls a certain way where you're at the 1-2 turn and you're in a third round reversal and you end up going, let's just say CeeDee Lamb plus a quarterback, and one of these guys were able to fall to you at the 301.
Yeah, it's conceivable you can start your draft with 2 of these players. You could draft CeeDee Lamb, let's say 107, 108, 109, and in the second round take St. Brown, or maybe somehow one of the other guys falls there, Nacua, Brian Thomas, or Neighbors, or you just take Collins or whatever the case is. So you're going to be in a position, if you start your draft that way, to have a very locked and loaded wide receiver core. And given what we've talked about, I put out a whole video on the quarterback position in Dynasty now, where it seems like there's a little bit more of a concentrated cluster of quarterbacks that you can get QBs later. It actually is a viable strategy, in my opinion. I think you can start with 2 of these absolute studs and not be totally screwed at running back, totally screwed at quarterback, given the strength of the running back draft class and the concentration of like 22 to 24 solid quarterback options.
For sure. I mean, these guys are studs. They're probably going to populate your second round, I would say. Like maybe at the start of the mid-second, all the way to the back end of the second. I would say the Brian Thomas Jr. and the Malik Neighbors more so on that 1-2 turn. And then, like I mentioned before, the Chase, Lamb, Jefferson, typically in the mid to late first round of your startups. But we can head on to what I believe is probably the third round range of these wide receivers. And to me, this tier starts with a bunch of young guys, Drake London, Marvin Harrison, and Ladd McConkey. But the wild cards that we do have in here are the rookie wide receivers. Now, we don't know what the NFL draft has in store. Who knows? Maybe by the time you're rewatching this after the NFL draft, Ted McMillan fell to 25 overall, and Travis Hunter said he's going to be a corner. Like, we don't necessarily know all 100% of the information right now, but what we do know is these guys are damn special wide receiver prospects.
Yeah, and I tweeted this out yesterday, but Ted McMillan having ran a 4.48 to 4.57, whatever the actual official number ends up being. Again, we saw multiple reports. Again, we know he's fast enough. That's the long and short of it. We know he's not slow. He doesn't run a 4.67 or something like that. He's into the league winners prospect tier in the prospect model, which means that Neighbors, Harrison, Lamb, and Chase are the only other prospects to have been on the level of Ted McMillan. Again, this is assuming his NFL mock draft database ADP right now is 9th overall. So this is assuming he goes in the top 10. If he falls 20th to Denver, which Mel Kiper, I believe, had in his mock draft today, then that would change his prospect ranking. And he's a little bit more similar to a Drake London or a Rome Odunze or somebody like that level of prospect, at Garrett Wilson, something like that. But again, I'm only naming good receivers right now. I'm not naming any busts or bums.
And I'll tell you right now, again, the media is kind of talking about like, oh, like, will he fall to 20? This and that. I don't buy it. I personally think his absolute floor would be at 12 to Dallas, because I don't find a scenario where if Dallas looked at him on the face at 12 overall and passed on him.
Yeah, and it's reasonable that he goes 4th to the Patriots, or 5th to the Jaguars, or 8th to the Panthers, or 6th to the Raiders. Like, I do believe there's enough wide receiver needy teams in the top 10 that could use a number 1 receiver, and Ted McMillan profiles, given his production, given his size, given him checking athletic boxes now, he is worthy of a top 10 pick to me. I don't buy this. And I heard Trevor Sigma was on with Matt Harmon on the Yahoo Fantasy podcast, and they were talking about how they don't understand why Ted McMillan is not a top 10 consensus player, top 10 consensus prospect. Trevor and PFF have never relented. He's a top 10 dude. And I tend to think that this is all just kind of prospect fatigue a little bit. And by the time April 24th comes along, he will be a top 10 pick. So again, if he's not, we'll probably slide him down a tier here. But for now, we are under the assumption top 12 at the very least is where he goes in the draft. You guys might also notice that Travis Hunter is in this tier. This is, of course, assuming
he plays wide receiver.
Assumption he plays wide receiver. And the reason that I think he will play wide receiver is because I think there's about a 60-70% chance that the team that drafts him will draft him as such. We have the Browns, who are the first team that legitimately can select him, probably because we think the Titans are probably going Cam Ward 1 overall. They have said they would draft him as a wide receiver. Andrew Berry at the Combine said that. And they could also use him at wide receiver because they already have a good secondary. The New England Patriots definitely probably use him at wide receiver in my estimation. Daniel Jeremiah also talked about that on the Move the Sticks podcast because they have Carlton Davis, they have Christian Gonzalez. They would probably draft him as a wide receiver. They haven't added anything really other than Matt Collins to that position in free agency. So that's what, a 66% chance. The only landmines are Jacksonville at 5 and the New York Giants at 3, which we don't know for sure that they wouldn't use him at wide receiver. We're just kind of assuming based on their depth chart, based on their need for a corner versus a wide receiver, maybe they primarily view him as that position group. So he's a tough one. Obviously, if he does play cornerback primarily at the NFL level, we'd have to completely rethink where he's ranked, but we're just ranking the talent and the ability of the player if somehow he does play this position.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best way to look at it too with Travis Hunter. His God-given ability to play wide receiver, considering how he's quote unquote unrefined, considering he was also spending the majority of his time in team defensive meetings. The guy looks like Odell Beckham Jr. That's the easiest way I'll put it. If he lives up to his upside, I think he might even have more fluidity than what OBJ had in his prime. Like, and I know that sounds outlandish to hear. Like, oh my God, OBJ, one of the most fluid wide receivers we have seen in NFL history. Travis Hunter moves differently to any prospect I have ever watched.
Yeah, and best hands we've really seen from an undersized receiver since Odell Beckham Jr., since some of those guys. So yeah, absolutely excellent player. London, Harrison, and McConkey, who are all in this tier as well. With London, again, you're still getting a very young receiver, probably entering the prime years production-wise of his career. We just saw him have like a breakout season. Finished as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Michael Penix and him are going to have time to develop a connection together. We can't imagine Kyle Pitts is going to be long for that situation. Darnell Mooney's a nice player, but he doesn't preclude Drake London from being the lead red zone guy, the lead target earner there. Marvin Harrison is a bit of a projection given what he did as a rookie relative to what Ladd McConkey, for example, did as a rookie, who's also in this tier. But Harrison is the best prospect in the history of the prospect model. Harrison did go to a team that used him nothing cheap. 4th overall pick. You're playing X receiver. You're seeing number 1 corners. Teams are game planning against you. And Trey McBride was the main beneficiary of that this year because Kyler looked his way more often than not. I think that defenses and teams will start to adjust a little bit. And Marvin Harrison, of course, as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old player now, will start to get better and better and be the prospect we all knew he was capable of being. I am a little bit higher on Harrison's ability than you are.
But not about the ability, in my opinion.
Yeah, you have to put the respect on it. You have to put respect on the player, the prospect that he was, and the moments that you saw from him. He did not have as good of a rookie season as Brian Thomas, as Malik Neighbors, or even potentially Ladd McConkey. I think you can definitely argue any which one of those, and it's probably just factual that he had a worse rookie season than all of those guys. But he's still tethered to a very capable franchise caliber quarterback. He has Trey McBride to draw some attention away, James Conner to move the offense, Trey Benson behind him, hopefully long-term can help move the offense. They should add more wide receivers to this team because Michael Wilson isn't doing much. They could use a great, like Christian Kirk would have made so much sense for them, a great slot receiver that can help move the chains and draw some attention away. Hopefully they add to this position because I actually do think it will help Harrison.
Yeah, I think even if they go in the draft, they add a receiver with some juice to be the number 2. Like, I don't necessarily think they might add one in the first, but I mean, who knows? Maybe they do, and they absolutely love a guy like Matthew Golden falls to that spot. I think that'd make a ton of sense. I think more so on day 2, like even with like a Jalen Royals to kind of supplement that intermediate yak game, give Marv more space to work down the field. I think that would be probably their best interest. Really, with this tier, again, we already talked about the rookies. Drake and Ladd kind of proven themselves from a production standpoint, but the reason why Marv isn't here and maybe not in the tier below is that the value accrual potential, if he does have a 1,200-yard year, everybody's going to remember the prospect he was.
Yeah, exactly. And 885, 8 touchdowns on 114 targets, and the 28th graded wide receiver in the NFL, 4th amongst rookies, the only ones being.
He had a rookie season.
He had a rookie season. McConkey was a higher graded rookie. He was 12th highest. Brian Thomas was a higher graded rookie. He was 19th highest according to PFF. Malik Neighbors, the 9th highest graded rookie according to PFF. So yeah, he objectively had a worse rookie season than these guys. It's pretty much not debatable, but 900 yards and 8 touchdowns, a guy who averaged 14.6 yards per reception. Like that's a pretty solid rookie season. It's just that he's Marvin Harrison Jr. So we all expected because he was drafted late first, early second of fantasy drafts that he would go for 1,500 yards as a rookie.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much why it's currently where it's at, because people had their expectations a little bit too high, and very well so. I had my expectations high. I thought there was a very real possibility in the situation with the volume you could receive. I mean, fuck, this guy was drafted on the 1-2 turn on redraft for a reason. Everybody thought, given the talent level, given the opportunity, that we would see it right away, and we just simply didn't. Now, that's not to say he can't hit it, because we saw kind of like a similar projection to CeeDee Lamb, where he didn't really have that big time year until his year 3. I think it could very well be the case where Marv just needs to take his lumps in year 1. Now he's going to be ready to play that full X wide receiver position in year 2.
Yeah, exactly. Let me give you a keep trade cut scenario here. Number 4 overall, the Patriots draft Travis Hunter, and they're playing him at wide receiver. Number 8 overall, the Carolina Panthers draft Ted McMillan. They're playing him obviously at wide receiver because that's the position he plays. Would you rather have Marvin Harrison or those two players in what I would consider nutted landing spots for them?
I would say that's probably like the 3rd or 4th best landing spot for Ted.
I mean, just it's top 10 draft capital to a team that needs a number 1. Maybe it's a different landing spot.
That would be the reason why I'd take him Marv over him, but I think any wide receivers that goes to Drake May, like I'm going to be taking him number 1 on that list. Quite frankly.
Okay. Yeah. So if McMillan went 4th, you're saying you would also take him over Harrison. Let's say Cleveland takes Hunter number 2 and he's playing wide receiver, and McMillan goes to the Patriots number 4.
Hunter, McMillan, and then Drake, or not Drake, Marv. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that would be great news for everybody involved. Yeah. McConkey, we kind of touched on briefly. Like I said, 12th highest graded rookie by PFF, or 12th highest graded player, wide receiver by PFF, 1,346 receiving yards when you include the postseason as a rookie. That is insanely good production for a guy that all of us liked, especially you and I. We were extremely high on the film of Ladd McConkey, but nobody was saying that he was going to have a monster rookie season because the prospect profile was such that you had to piece it together. You had to account for the injuries. You had to account for the fact that he competed for targets with Brock Bowers at Georgia, Adonai Mitchell at Georgia, George Pickens at Georgia. There's even guys in this draft class, Arian Smith, who's probably going to get drafted into the NFL. He had pieces of his prospect profile, but he was an absolute stud as a rookie. He was completely undebatable. The Chargers did not add anybody in free agency other than bringing back old, washed up Mike Williams. They lost Josh Palmer in free agency as well. So we'll see what they do in the draft. I can't imagine they're going to draft a receiver in the first round. Maybe they would. But I think tight end is probably more likely the position that gets added to this group. Maybe they add a receiver on day 2. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But regardless, Ladd McConkey definitely on the up and up. They also add Mekhi Becton into the offensive line to help shore up that position group. And it was already a good line to begin with.
Yeah, and the other factor too is they could have been in the Devontae Adams sweepstakes, Cooper Kupp sweepstakes, a lot of wide receivers that were available on the market, and they settled on, you know what, we got familiarity with Big Mike to play that X wide receiver position, and they bring back Mike Williams on a cheap deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So easy, cut and dry why Ladd McConkey has gained some value here. The next tier down is like the mini tier, because I think you can make the argument maybe that some of these guys belong into the tier that we just talked about. But for me and for you, we're like, yeah, JSN, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, and T. Higgins, now that he's extended with the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm actually wearing a Bengals shirt right now, so I didn't actually plan that. These guys are a little bit of a tier behind these other guys. With JSN, I mean, you got to worry about what's Sam Darnold going to look like? Is that going to be the same as the Geno Smith situation? I think from a schematic perspective too, DK Metcalf opened up so much for JSN over the middle of the field. Everybody is scared shitless of DK Metcalf beating them for a 70-yard touchdown. And now with Cooper Kupp there, you no longer have that speed element. Maybe they address a Matthew Golden in the draft or something, but we'll have to kind of wait and see how that plays out for JSN. Target-wise, good news that DK Metcalf is gone, but Kupp maybe plays a similar role.
Yeah, no, it was funny. Every time when they first made the signing for Cooper Kupp, all I saw on my timeline was, oh, what are we going to call this duo? The slot machine? Because that's literally what they are. Just 2 slot wide receivers. Now, obviously different archetypes, because I would say Cooper Kupp's a little bit bigger from a profile perspective than JSN is. JSN a little bit more elusive. But regardless, I am curious to see how Clint Kubiak is able to work this out, because, I mean, it makes sense why he would target these type of wide receivers. You know, for example, we see with the Rams, guys like Puka Nacua, obviously. Cooper Kupp obviously came from the Rams. We even see with the 49ers, a guy like Jawan Jennings had a big time year working in that Shanahan type of scheme. And as we know with Clint Kubiak, son of Gary Kubiak, who worked hand in hand with Mike Shanahan, we know exactly what Clint Kubiak wants to do on offense. And I will say JSN does fit that profile of a wide receiver that would thrive there. It just depends on how much credence you're going to give to a washed up Cooper Kupp.
Exactly, too, because it's not like they gave Cooper Kupp nothing. $15 million a year is quite a bit of money. And at this point in Cooper Kupp's career, I don't know if he can function on the outside anymore, or at least to the level that he could once at best points of his career. And even when he was at his best, he was primarily a slot receiver. So we said this about JSN coming out. He wasn't only a slot receiver prospect. We thought by year 3 or whatever, which is the year he's going into, maybe he develops into an outside wide receiver, but it's pretty undeniable that he is better in the slot.
Much better.
And JSN last year played, what is the percentage here? 83.6% of his snaps from the slot. And that resulted in him having 133 targets, 1,130 yards, 6 touchdowns, being the 16th highest graded wide receiver in the NFL and a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. So is this going to hurt his outlook? Maybe. It kind of remains to be seen, because he's also losing, in our opinion, the better quarterback of him and Geno Smith and Sam Darnold as well. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. I'm cautiously optimistic that I'm just going to trust the young player continuing to get better. And Cooper Kupp is objectively probably a worse receiver at this point in time than DK Metcalf was, but DK Metcalf schematically might have opened up the middle of the field for JSN. So it's a little bit of a weird projection here, and we kind of also don't really know what the Seahawks are doing in general.
Yeah, that's pretty much where it's at. In terms of AJ Brown, it's pretty simple. Talent-wise, he would be in one of the first 2 tiers, to be honest. I would even say from a pure talent perspective, he'd be up there with Chase, Jefferson, and Lamb. The problem is that he's an aging wide receiver in a situation that has low passing volume with another really top-end wide receiver next to him.
Yeah, AJ Brown is going to be 28 years old before the start of the regular season this year. June, at the end of June is when his birthday is.
Yep.
So he is starting to get into the territory where
Unk
he can't really
status.
go up in value anymore. He's just, if he keeps producing, and you enjoy that on a contending roster. But the second you draft this player in the third, fourth,
Appreciating asset.
whatever round, he's now a depreciating asset, and you have to win. That's pretty much where you're at with taking AJ Brown in a startup and rostering AJ Brown on a competitive team.
Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up. Given the age complex and given the fact that, I mean, I would be hard pressed at this point to say he has this 22 plus PPR point per game ceiling. Could he reach that 18 to 20 range on God given talent? Absolutely. But we've kind of seen what the Eagles want to do on offense. And if it's working, it won them a Super Bowl. Why would they change it?
Yeah, absolutely. With Wilson and Higgins sometimes get a lot of flack too.
I
And
moved
with
Higgins
Wilson,
above, by the way.
yeah, that's a totally fair thing to do, because if you really think about the projection there, if the Bengals offense throws 4,700 yards for the next 3-4 years, which given the state of their defense is probably going to happen, and the Jets offense now with Justin Fields for the next at least 1 year, probably 2, given the contract $30 million guaranteed that they gave Justin Fields, are they going to throw 3,600 yards of passing offense versus the 4,700 yards of offense that you're going to get with T. Higgins and the Bengals? Like, you can definitely make that argument for sure. I still believe in the ability Garrett Wilson has, and I also don't want to factor in situation too much for a player like him because A, he's up for a contract extension. B, he's expressed, maybe contempt about staying with the Jets. Maybe he would get traded after this season, midway through this season. We don't really know. I'm just kind of investing into the talent of the player at this point, but it's kind of inarguable that Justin Fields and the pass volume that comes with Justin Fields is probably going to hurt his bottom line.
Yeah, for me, the reason why I do put Higgins now at 14, if we're excluding the rookies versus Garrett Wilson, is that we know exactly the certainty of the situation. Both him and Chase are on 4-year deals. Burrow's already extended. Like you said, the defense is not going to be great. With those guys on offense, they're never really going to be able to fully invest on a top-end running back type of deal. So at this point, for certain for the next 4 years that the offense will revolve around that passing game and will revolve around getting 2 wide receiver ones fed the football.
Yeah, it's T. Higgins produced as one of the best 5 to 6 receivers in fantasy on the same field as the Triple Crown yards, targets, and touchdowns and receiving receptions leader.
But a lot of people, their championships.
Exactly. It's insane to think that he was that productive on the same field as a first-team All-Pro receiver.
Yeah, no, remarkable. And I do think this kind of highlights this tier where AJ Brown and T. Higgins, again, T. Higgins isn't necessarily old, but compared to this 4 bunch, he is the second oldest, obviously being, I believe, a 1999 birthday, whereas Garrett Wilson and JSN are 2001 and 2002 respectively. So that would be the factor that Garrett Wilson, you can make the case, is he really on the level of these other guys given the production we have seen from him? It's more so just believing on the talent and the fact that the volume was where it was at prior to Devontae Adams coming, seeing that type of light. But if somebody wanted to say, hey, you know what, Garrett Wilson kind of has to be a half tier behind these guys, that's kind of where I'm at this point.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that, especially when you factor in the top rookies still remaining, like Emeka Egbuka and Luther Burden, who are both respectively our wide receiver 3s. If they were to get really good landing spots, like if you get Emeka Egbuka, to me, the best landing spot he can go to is Denver because it's a short-term wide receiver 2, long-term wide receiver 1 with a young quarterback who I believe in. If he were to go to that landing spot, I would probably rank him ahead of maybe multiple of these guys, but I would definitely rank him amongst these guys in this tier. And for you, Burden's only 21 years old. Like if he goes to a great landing spot, maybe the Cowboys take him at 12 or something like that. Or, the Cardinals take him at 16, or I don't know, whatever his best landing spot. Maybe the Texans take him at the end of the first round or something. He would definitely factor into this tier as well. We do have those guys in the next tier down, kind of factoring in median projection. But speaking of that next tier down, it is a large group of players, and I'm actually going to make us a little bit smaller so that we can see everybody. And it's a position group here where you have, like I said, those rookies, Egbuka and Luther Burden, who are respectively our wide receiver 3s in the class. We have enough problems with those players and enough question marks about where they'll go, what the draft capital will be. Specifically with Burden, we've heard that he might slide out of the first round entirely, to the point that we have to factor in that they're probably not on the level of those other guys.
And for what it's worth, across this whole tier, obviously we did take our consensus. There are a couple guys that we do have quite a big range of rankings. Specifically, you just mentioned Luther Burden. He's a guy that I do have at 17, you have at 27. So that averages out to about 22. I personally would have had him right next to Igbokwe. I have him one spot higher than Igbokwe, but obviously we're both high on Igbokwe. You're not as high on Luther Burden, hence why there's a little bit of a disparity there.
Yeah, and with each of these guys, we can just quickly make some cases here. Yeah. Rome Odunze just got Ben Johnson coming in. DJ Moore is a great receiver, and I think it's still possible that DJ Moore is the number one this year in Chicago. But by year 3 of Rome Odunze's career, we got to imagine he's starting to take over that number 1 role. He's developing the chemistry with the young quarterback. They have a great new play caller, and they've beefed up their offensive line. Both of us expect them to address the running back position in the draft pretty high with one of their first 4. Like, they have 3 picks in the top 45 picks or something like that. They're going to draft a running back at some point. Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, both of those guys are tethered to Patrick Mahomes. Rashee Rice has some knee injury question marks, some off-field question marks. Worthy maybe has some off-field question marks, but we don't know for sure. They play different roles. From a PPR lens, I have Rashee Rice higher, but if you're factoring in the suspension and the knee injury, that's probably why you have Xavier Worthy higher. It's kind of pick your flavor with those guys.
Yeah, if I knew for certain that we were going to get the same Rashee Rice we saw at the beginning of the season, yeah, no problem even raising him higher. The issue is because of the looming suspension, because of the knee issue. That's not a guarantee. So I just, at this point on the market, want to be aligned with the market as opposed to aggressively above it. That's kind of where I'm at with Rashee Rice. You mentioned the Rome Odunze as well. And I think the biggest upside, I would say, of the situation, obviously we all know Ben Johnson is going to inherently increase the value of this offense. But this was actually what Nate Tice and Matt were talking about on their podcast together. So obviously we know with Rome Odunze, he didn't have quite the high-end year similar to Marvin Harrison in terms of what we expected this year. Top 10 level talent. I think he barely had less than 800 receiving yards. Like, we expected maybe a guy that would probably be closer to probably the 900 to 1,000 yard range. But regardless, I do think, like Marv, he did have his similar rookie lumps. Now we get a situation again. He still got the size. He still got the speed. He still got the route running ability. He still got that high point ability. But I think where he can actually improve, like Matt and Nate were talking about, is on that slot rate, because he only spent 35.3% of his snaps in the slot. Now, obviously, he does have the ability to play the X, so I don't think he's going to be some exclusive slot wide receiver. But basically, what Nate Tice and Matt said is that with Ben Johnson in Chicago potentially using Rome Odunze as that power slot Amon St. Brown role, given the archetype of body that he has and given the fact that he's a plus blocker.
Yeah, Odunze is one guy that I go a little bit back and forth on, because part of me wants to just be like, dude, stop overthinking this. He was a really good prospect.
That's where I'm at with it.
Top 10 pick. He now has Ben Johnson. He has Caleb Williams throwing him the ball. But then part of me goes, I think Harrison's rookie season had more flashes than Odunze's rookie season, to the point that,
they're very comparable.
I disagree, dude. You had only 4 games his rookie season where he went over 50 receiving yards, Rome Odunze.
Well, that's a collective.
Again, it's tough for me to go,
I just think you got to be congruent, man.
Of course, I am being congruent. And Harrison was objectively a better prospect, which is why I gave him a little bit more leeway. He also has a clear runway to be the number 1 receiver on his team, versus DJ Moore is still a really talented player.
I barely clearly think Rome Odunze could easily be the number 1 there.
I do too, but there's no DJ Moore on the Cardinals, is my point.
Hey, then you should rate DJ Moore on your rankings.
I do have him on my rankings, not quite.
No, raise him. Sorry.
Yeah, I probably should.
Raise him. Yeah, okay.
I probably should. But anyways, Odunze had his lumps as a rookie, had some flashes, 200-yard games where he looked like he was putting it together. Only 3 games of over a 70 PFF receiving grade concerns me a little bit. Only 4 games of over 50 receiving yards concerns me a little bit. The Bears offense in general was such a train wreck that maybe we want to just throw out the entire season together with Odunze and with Caleb Williams and with anybody else in that offense. It's definitely valid to have that opinion, in my opinion.
I just think if you're going to give Marv the benefit of the doubt, you have to extend that to Rome Odunze as well.
That's fair. That's totally fair. This next group of receivers, we have a little bit of variance on. I think it's partially a philosophical difference between the two of us, whereas I'm very comfortable with Zay Flowers, Devontae Smith, Jordan Addison, even into the next year with Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, some of these guys. I know they're not going to be the wide receiver 1 on my Dynasty roster. Probably not even the wide receiver 2 on my Dynasty roster, given how we draft teams where we want to go wide receiver heavy early on. I think that I'm okay with the fact that Zay Flowers probably never has a top 10 wide receiver finish, that Devontae Smith probably never has a top 10 wide receiver finish without an AJ Brown injury. Jordan Addison, same goes for Justin Jefferson injury, and Chris Olave, he's a little bit undersized. Receiving upside is a little bit capped because of the offense and the quarterback that he plays with. Waddle, again, Tyreek is there and all that kind of stuff. There's factors that limit the ceiling of all these players. For me, Flowers has the best ceiling because there's not really anything standing in his way of being better and getting better and growing alongside one of the best quarterbacks who's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when he hangs it up. With all these guys, though, I know the argument is, what's the ceiling with all these players? Are they ever going to be 18 plus PPR point per game scores? And the answer to that, I think, is probably no. But if you can lock me into 14 to 17 PPR points per game for the next 6 years with a lot of these guys, I think that's worthy of a 5th round startup selection and my wide receiver 3 on my roster or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Again, it's not like I have these guys tanked in my rankings. Addison 22, Smith 23, and Flowers is at 25 because there's another rookie we haven't talked about quite yet that I have higher on him. But judging from the graphic on the screen, I think you guys can kind of piece that together. But the reason why I do have Luther Burden specifically higher than those guys as my wide receiver 17 is kind of what you alluded to. For me personally, from a principal perspective, I don't like shelling out mid-first round draft capital to wide receivers that I view with limited ceilings. I'm not saying that they don't have ceilings as top 12 to 15 guys, but I do think that's limited to, I want a guy that could potentially have a wide receiver 7 overall season, a wide receiver 8 overall season, which is why, for example, T. Higgins showed this past year that when we needed him most, he could be a mid-end wide receiver 1. That's why he kind of escaped this cluster. Otherwise, I mean, for the longest time, we were comparing Higgins to Devontae Smith, to Zay Flowers going into last year. I do think he separated himself, which is why he's in that tier above. For me, with Luther Burden, he's going to be selected in the mid-first round of rookie drafts. So if I say I'm unwilling to part with a mid-1 for maybe a modest ceiling, but I'm willing to take Luther Burden in that range, that just shows to me that I'm willing to accept his lumps as a prospect, given the ceiling potential that I see from him. Because this is a guy, after his sophomore season, we are comping, can this be the next Malik Neighbors? Can this be the next Jamar Chase? And while he did face his lumps this past year, I'm not going to deny that it was a down year compared to our expectations. I also do think the Missouri offense, the Drinkwitz offense, did limit him in terms of what he could have potentially developed into. And I do think a smart NFL wide receiver coach could be able to get that out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I have no qualms with you saying you'll chase the ceiling. My thought process on these guys has changed in recent years. I think the projection for like Zay Flowers, for example, is he finishes wide receiver 18 next year. Maybe there's a year over the next 4 or 5 seasons where the Ravens deal with a lot of defensive injuries and their pass rate spikes or something like that, and he gets like a wide receiver 12 finish out of it or something like that. My thought process is you're going to give me a top 24 receiver for the next like 4 seasons who's 24 years old. I'm just going to take that. And I don't think you can go broke taking a profit on a player like that. So yeah, you could chase the ceiling and whatnot, but I'm going to just take the profit on some of these players.
And the viewers are lucky we don't have Khalil Shakir at the end of the video.
We do not have Khalil Shakir at the end of the video. Let's move down to the next tier of players. I'm going to just get us out of the way here. Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Matthew Golden, who you alluded to. You would have ranked in that other tier that we just talked about, DK Metcalf, Jameson Williams, George Pickens, and Terry McLaurin. So some of these guys, for what it's worth, are competitive assets. DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, and even some of the other guys. Definitely Jalen Waddle, more competitive assets. You need to be in a winning window. For us, the way we build teams, they're probably your wide receiver 3 through 5 on your roster because you build up that wide receiver core really strong. I've done hundreds of team reviews, it seems like. And if you guys want team reviews, you can get those down below in the description, where we break down your team for like 6 to 10 minutes, where people have Brian Thomas, AJ Brown, and then DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, those type of guys. Like the way that you guys build teams based on the advice that we've given the last couple of years is build up that wide receiver core. So part of me doesn't really care about the argument that DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Brandon Ayuk, some of these guys don't have wide receiver 6 upside anymore. I just kind of like the production because I think most of our audience understands that they're not your wide receiver 1, 2, or even 3 potentially on your roster.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's outrageous to say that because I do think all those guys respectively put up about even 0.9 to 0.95 the production, and in some cases even more production as maybe even some of the guys ahead of them in the next year. The only difference, obviously, of course, is that we're kind of offsetting the value accrual potential, which is why I would also have Matthew Golden in the tier above because of that value accrual potential. Because for me personally, I do have Burden and Igbuka would be at the front of that tier in the mid to late first section, and then Golden would be at the back end of it. But based off what we're hearing, the NFL media has had this guy as the wide receiver 1 in their rankings. He's a natural 3-level separator that can high point the football. He averaged 82 yards per game, 5 touchdowns in his last 8 games against SEC and college football playoff competition. This just feels like a guy that the NFL will take a liking to. And I would be hard pressed to see him falling out of the top 15 when the NFL draft has come. And if he goes top 15, top 10, the dynasty market's going to go crazy over that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Golden, you can rank, depending on your evaluation of Golden, you could rank him in this tier, at the head of this tier, or like you said, even at the back of the tier ahead, because given the draft capital and some of the stuff we're hearing, he definitely will have value accrual potential to go a lot higher than these guys. And that's why philosophically you're just like, I'm just going to rank Golden up there now, because if Golden does hit at the next level, he is going to be already a top 12 dynasty wide receiver this time next year when we're having this conversation. He'll blow by DK Metcalf, DJ Moore types with ease at that point.
The way I look at Golden, and obviously they are different, but I mean, for example, I view this as a situation where we were talking about Chris Olave a few years ago as like a back end first round pick. And then he had that rise to 11th overall with the Saints. And we saw again, although he's in this tier at this point, I think that more so has to do with the injury history, the concussion history. At one point, Chris Olave was viewed as a consensus top 12 overall dynasty wide receiver. So I've already seen it with Olave where the market was kind of like, oh, the production isn't really there. Like, but he's got good route running. Like people were conflicted on Chris Olave like they are Golden. And I already saw the value accrual that Chris Olave had with the production he had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Olave, I actually have Olave in the tier above. Like I still believe that he's on the level of a Jordan Addison or Devontae
When
Smith.
he's fully healthy, I agree. I'm just a little bit concerned with the concussions because I think it's up to 4 now.
Exactly. And all the young guys in this tier, Olave, Waddle, I mean, Waddle's kind of in his prime now at this point, but Waddle, Olave, Jameson Williams, and George Pickens, they're all just like one minor concern, kind of keeping them from being in the other territory. Yeah. With Olave, you just alluded to it. It's the concussion issues and also the fact that he plays with Derek Carr and that situation. Jalen Waddle has to deal with Tyreek still. Jameson Williams just lost Ben Johnson. He's also a bit of a knucklehead. We have to factor that in a little bit. And George Pickens is a big knucklehead also. And he also just had DK Metcalf added to his receiving core. And we still don't know who's going to play quarterback for this team.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't even mention Ayuk's literally tore his knee this past year. I think this is kind of we can see them being wide receiver twos, but they have more concerns with the tier above tier is kind of how I view this. And then, I mean, we could just mention it now. Terry McLaurin was the final player added to this. I don't necessarily view him as the same tier as these other guys, but also I do think he's the head of like the next tier of the vets where we talk about Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Chris Godwin, etc. Just because he's slightly younger than those guys.
Yeah, and he'll turn 30 during this season, so he is not like he's actually the same age as Chris Godwin, and even maybe a little bit. I think he's actually a little bit older than Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin right now is 29.1 years old. He was born February 27th, 1996.
Yeah, he's older.
McLaurin
wow,
is a year older or 6-7 months older than Chris Godwin is. So I think it's because Godwin came into the league so much younger, and McLaurin 2 draft classes later was an older prospect. So. Yeah, McLaurin, Godwin, Tyreek, Adams, Evans, those type of dudes would fill out the next territory. And then you'd get into other younger guys with more concerns like Jaden Reed, like Josh Downs, those type of guys. But we're kind of just functioning here, the top 30 to 36 wide receivers, the guys that we'd reasonably give up late first round, early second round draft capital or more for these players. These are the significant dynasty assets at this position.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, it didn't actually make it via our consensus, but I actually do have Reed and Downs 1 spot and 2 spots ahead of McLaurin, respectively.
Yeah, and it would depend on your team build because by that point in startup draft, you'd be in like the 6th round, 7th round. You would know what kind of direction you're going in. If you're a rebuilding team and all you have is rookies and draft picks, like Josh Downs probably fits your team a lot more than having a 30-year-old Terry McLaurin on your roster. So that's kind of what we're looking at with this position group. Again, there's a lot of players that we could have talked about more in depth, but I think we gave you guys a pretty decent overview of how the position stacks up. You guys can see the trade values alongside the left of these columns here. We have our trade value charts for every position. If you guys want to check that out over on the site, we have not updated it post free agency yet, but as we're going through these dynasty rankings this week, we will update it post free agency, including rookies as well. So you know exactly how these rookies stack up the way that we did it in this video. If you want all of our dynasty rankings, all of our rookie rankings, our rookie draft guide version 2.0 coming out April 1st, which will have pro day numbers, combine numbers, another 30-ish prospects added to the group for a total of like 60 to 65 dudes to get you guys ready for your dynasty rookie drafts. Plus the prospect model comparisons will also be in the draft guide as well. Definitely check out all that stuff over on flockfantasy.com. If you guys want a team review, if you want to buy, sell, hold report, check out that stuff over on flockfantasy.com as well. Promo code FSE gets you discounts on all of that. But with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.